Elias Crowe stood at the edge of the water, boots sinking into wet sand, watching the gray curtain swallow the shoreline of Roanoke Island. The morning sun was somewhere above the haze, but it gave no warmth, no comfort. Only light, thin and pale, like an old photograph left too long in a drawer. He had waited 23 years to come back here. The island was quiet in the early hours. No tourists yet. No school groups reenacting history with paper hats and plastic muskets. Just the gulls, the distant creak of dock wood, and the sound of his own breathing. Elias reached into his coat and touched the leather-bound journal pressed against his chest, as if to confirm it was real. It was. The journal had arrived 3 weeks ago with no return address, no note, just his name written across the front in ink, so faded it was almost brown. He had known what it was the moment he touched it, even before he opened it, and saw the handwriting inside. His father's handwriting. Henry Crowe had vanished in 1999 while researching the Lost Colony of Roanoke. Officially, it was ruled an accidental drowning, a slipped foot, a bad tide, an unfortunate end to an obsessed historian. But no body was ever found. And now, after more than 2 decades of silence, Henry Crowe was speaking again, through ink, paper, and secrets never meant to be uncovered. Elias turned away from the water and began walking inland, following a narrow path through scrub oak and marsh grass. The air smelled of salt and decay, of things old and half-buried. Every step felt like a trespass. The journal's first entry was dated June 3rd, 1587. That alone should have been impossible. The Roanoke colony was supposed to be a footnote, a cautionary tale. 115 men, women, and children vanished without a trace from an English settlement off the coast of what would one day be called North Carolina. When Governor John White returned from England 3 years later, the colony was empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just one word carved into a post: Croatoan. Historians debated it for centuries. Assimilation, massacre, starvation, relocation. Every theory fell short. Every answer raised more questions. Henry Crowe believed none of them were right. Elias remembered his father's voice late at night, echoing through their small Virginia home, thick with cigarette smoke and obsession. They didn't disappear, Henry would say. They were taken. Taken by what? He never fully explained. The path opened into a clearing where a wooden fort reconstruction stood, silent and empty. The structure looked harmless in daylight, almost quaint, but Elias felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He had been here as a child, holding his father's hand, listening to stories meant for adults. Henry Crowe had never believed the official narrative. Elias stepped inside the fort. The wood creaked under his weight. Shadows pooled in the corners where sunlight refused to reach. He pulled the journal from his coat and opened it to the page marked with a folded scrap of paper. June 12th, 1587. They are watching us. The handwriting was unmistakable, tight, angular, urgent. Not the Croatan, not the Spanish, something older. The Algonquian stories were warnings, not myths. They speak of the hollow men, of those who walk between seasons. Elias swallowed. The hollow men. His father had mentioned them once, years ago, after too much whiskey and too little sleep. Elias had dismissed it as folklore fever, the kind of thing that happens when a man stares too long into unanswered questions. Now the words sat on the page, heavy and undeniable. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the fort walls. Elias continued reading. Henry Crowe's final field notes described a series of underground chambers beneath the island, natural caverns widened by human hands long before European arrival. According to tribal oral histories Henry had recorded in secret, the chambers were places of offering, places of passage, places where people went in and did not always return the same. The last entry in the journal was dated October 19th, 1999. I have found the mark. It is not Croatoan. It is a name that cannot be spoken aloud. If anyone reads this, do not trust the silence. The entry ended abruptly. The ink smeared as if the writer's hand had been shaking or pulled away. Elias closed the journal. The silence inside the fort pressed in on him, thick and unnatural. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then he heard it. A soft sound, like wood scraping against wood. Elias turned slowly. One of the support beams at the far end of the fort bore a carving he was certain had not been there moments before. The letters were shallow, uneven, as if cut with a dull blade. Not Croatoan. Something else. A word older than English. A word that made Elias feel suddenly, inexplicably, watched. He backed away, heart pounding, and nearly collided with a figure standing in the doorway. The man was tall, dressed in a ranger's uniform faded with age. His face was weathered, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You shouldn't be here this early," the man said calmly. Elias struggled to find his voice. "The park's open, isn't it?" The ranger studied him for a long moment, then glanced at the journal clutched in Elias's hand. Something flickered across his expression. Recognition, or perhaps fear. "Some places," the man said quietly. "Never really close." Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What do you know about Henry Crowe?" he asked. The ranger's jaw tightened. "I was wondering when you'd come back," he replied. Beyond the fort walls, the fog thickened, rolling in fast now, swallowing the trees, the path, the shoreline. And far beneath Roanoke Island, something old stirred, aware at last that the silence had been broken. The ranger's name was Thomas Hale. At least, that was the name stitched onto his uniform, the letters frayed as if they had been sewn decades ago and never replaced. He did not offer his hand. He did not smile. He simply stepped aside and let the fog drift past him into the fort, where it curled around the beams like something alive. "You look like him," Hale said. Elias frowned. "Like who?" "Your father." Hale's eyes lingered on Elias's face longer than was comfortable. Same eyes. Same way of standing, like you're bracing for something to come out of the ground. Elias exhaled slowly. "You knew him?" Hale nodded once. Better than he realized. They walked out of the fort together. The fog was thick now, turning the reconstructed village into a ghost of itself. Shapes loomed and vanished only a few feet away. Elias felt the disorienting sense that they were no longer alone on the island. "Did he tell you why he was really here?" Hale asked. "He told me he was studying history," Elias replied. "He told me the truth, or what he thought was the truth." Hale stopped walking. "Henry Crowe stopped studying history the moment history started studying him," he said. They reached a narrow service building near the tree line. Hale unlocked the door and motioned Elias inside. The interior smelled of dust, old paper, and damp wood. A single bulb flickered overhead. Against one wall stood filing cabinets, their drawers dented and rusted. On the other wall hung maps, some modern, some hand-drawn, some so old the paper had yellowed into something like bone. Hale pulled one map free. "This isn't on any brochure," he said, spreading it across a table. "Your father helped me make it." The map showed Roanoke Island riddled with markings, circles, lines, symbols that resembled neither English nor Algonquian script. Several locations were marked with the same sign Elias had seen carved into the fort beam. "What is it?" Elias asked. "A boundary," Hale replied. "Or what's left of one." Hale had been stationed at Roanoke Island for 37 years. He had seen historians come and go, tourists, skeptics, believers, thrill-seekers. But Henry Crowe had been different. He listened. He asked the wrong questions in the right places, and eventually he started noticing things no one else wanted to see. Disappearances. Not dramatic ones. Not the kind that made headlines. Just people who wandered off trails and were never found. Or were found days later, miles away, confused, silent, unable to explain where they had been. Every generation, Hale said, someone gets too close. Elias traced one of the symbols on the map with his finger. And the colony? Hale's face hardened. They didn't vanish in a night. They faded. One by one. Families first. Children. Then the rest. By the time White returned, there was nothing left that wanted to be found. Elias thought of the journal's opening entry. They are watching us. Watching from where? He asked. Hale folded the map carefully. Below. And they waited until nightfall. The fog did not lift. If anything, it grew denser, swallowing sound and distance. Hale led Elias along a narrow trail far from the tourist paths, deeper into the island's interior. Trees leaned inward, their branches tangled overhead like clasping hands. They stopped before a sinkhole hidden behind a curtain of vines. This is one of them, Hale said. One of what? Doors? Hale pulled a flashlight from his belt and shined it downward. The light vanished into darkness after only a few feet. Elias felt a low vibration under his boots, so subtle he might have imagined it. Your father went down there, Hale said, against my advice. Elias tightened his grip on the journal. Did he come back? Hale hesitated. Not the way he went in. The descent was narrow and steep. The air grew colder with every step, thick with the smell of wet stone, and something else, something organic, ancient. The walls bore markings etched deep into the rock, symbols that seemed to twist when Elias tried to focus on them. They reached a cavern that opened wider than Elias expected. The ceiling disappeared into shadow. The floor was uneven, strewn with stones, arranged in deliberate patterns. In the center stood a structure made of wood and bone, its design unmistakably human and utterly wrong. This predates the colony, Hale said softly. Predates the tribes even. The stories say it was already old when the first people arrived. Elias felt his skin prickle. What lives here? He asked. Hale did not answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a small recorder from his pocket and pressed play. Henry Crowe's voice filled the cavern, distorted but recognizable. They are not gods, Henry said. They are not spirits. They are witnesses, and they are hungry. The recording cut out with a sharp burst of static. Elias's breath caught. You have recordings of him? Only what he left behind, Hale replied, and what he became. A sound echoed through the cavern. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from deeper within the darkness. Hale reached for his flashlight. Stay close, he whispered. They don't like to be seen. The footsteps stopped. The darkness shifted, and Elias realized, with a creeping dread, that something was standing just beyond the edge of the light. Something tall, thin, and patient. Something that knew his name. The thing in the darkness did not move. It did not breathe. It simply existed, occupying the space beyond the flashlight's reach, as if it had always been there and always would be. Elias felt an unbearable pressure behind his eyes, a sensation like memory being pulled backward through time. Hale lowered the flashlight slightly, angling the beam toward the ground. Don't stare, he murmured. That's how it notices you noticing it. Elias swallowed and forced his gaze downward. The stone floor seemed to ripple faintly, like water disturbed by a passing shadow. The symbols carved into the rock pulsed, not with light, but with recognition. What is it? Elias whispered. Hale's voice was barely audible. One of the witnesses. The words settled heavily in the cavern. The tribes called them many things, Hale continued, names that translate poorly. Watchers, rememberers, those who were here before. They don't hunt like animals. They observe. They catalog. And when something no longer belongs to the world above, they reclaim it. The pressure intensified. Elias's thoughts began to slip, fragments of images flashing unbidden behind his eyes. Wooden ships cutting through gray water, lantern light trembling in the dark. Voices speaking English with unfamiliar accents. Then a new image surfaced. His father. Henry Crowe stood in this very cavern, younger than Elias remembered him, eyes wide, not with fear, but with awe. He was speaking aloud, words tumbling over each other in excitement and terror. "You're real," Henry said. "You're older than history." The witness stepped closer. Elias gasped as the vision snapped away. He staggered, nearly falling, and Hale caught his arm. "It's trying to show you things," Hale said. "That's how they communicate. Memory is their language." "Why me?" Elias asked, breathless. Hale looked at him with something like regret. "Because you're already marked." They retreated slowly, step by step, until the cavern narrowed and the pressure eased. Only when they reached the base of the sinkhole did Hale allow himself to breathe normally. Elias leaned against the rock wall, shaking. "You knew this would happen," Elias said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a realization. "Yes," Hale replied, "and no." He sat heavily on a stone ledge. "Henry believed the witnesses were bound to Roanoke," Hale said, "that the colony's disappearance was an isolated event. He was wrong." Elias opened the journal again, flipping through pages he had skimmed, but not truly read. Symbols filled the margins now, symbols he did not remember seeing before. "They're everywhere," Elias said slowly. "Aren't they?" Hale nodded. "Always have been. Jamestown, St. Augustine, Plymouth. Every early settlement has its ghost stories, its lost names, its unexplained gaps. The United States," Elias whispered, "was built on them." "On forgetting them," Hale corrected. That night, Elias dreamed without sleeping. He stood in a forest untouched by axes or fire. Figures moved among the trees, English settlers, their clothes worn and faces hollow. They walked willingly, following tall, faceless shapes deeper into the woods. A woman carrying a child turned back once, her mouth opening as if to speak. No sound came out. The dream shifted. A council of men in powdered wigs argued over maps and borders. Behind them, unseen, the witnesses stood in the corners of the room, listening, recording, waiting. Then Elias was no longer an observer. He was standing beside his father, at the edge of a chamber far larger than the one beneath Roanoke. Henry's face was calm. "They don't want to kill us," Henry said. "They want to keep us." "Why?" Elias asked. Henry smiled sadly. "Because we don't know how to leave things alone." Elias woke with a gasp. Morning light filtered weakly through the trees. Hale was already awake, staring toward the sinkhole as if expecting it to open again. "They're not done with you," Hale said. Elias sat up. "What do they want?" "To correct an imbalance," Hale replied. "The colony was the first warning. Your father was the second. And me?" Hale met his eyes. "You're the response." They returned to the service building. Hale unlocked a cabinet Elias had not noticed before and removed a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a stack of documents, brittle with age. "Your father stole these from the National Archives," Hale said flatly. "Copies, technically. But still." Elias scanned the pages. Colonial correspondence, private letters, margins filled with frantic notes. "These people knew," Elias said. "Some of them did," Hale replied. and they chose silence. Every generation makes the same bargain. Prosperity in exchange for forgetting what was taken. Elias felt the weight of the journal in his coat. The witnesses don't forget. No, Hale agreed. They collect. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Elias spoke. What happened to my father? Hale's eyes darkened. He crossed a threshold meant for many, he said. And he stayed. They returned to the sinkhole at dusk. This time, Elias descended alone. The cavern welcomed him with familiarity. The symbols glowed faintly, responding to his presence. The witness emerged from the darkness, closer now, its form more defined. Tall, elongated, its surface shifting like smoke trapped in human shape. Elias did not look away. I know what you are, he said. The pressure returned, but this time it was gentler. Images flooded his mind, not as assault, but as offering. The colony's final days. The settlers walking willingly underground, guided by promises of survival, of belonging. The witnesses preserving them, not alive, not dead, but remembered. And then Henry Crowe, standing among them, watching, waiting. Elias felt tears burn his eyes. You want me to stay, he said. The witness did not answer, but the cavern pulsed with certainty. Elias thought of the world above, the noise, the forgetting, the endless hunger to build and consume. He thought of his father's voice, his obsession, his sacrifice. He took one step forward, then another. Above, the fog rolled in once more, covering Roanoke Island in silence. And somewhere deep beneath America's oldest mysteries, the witnesses added a new memory to their endless record. Elias did not disappear. That, in the end, was the first deviation from the pattern. He stood at the threshold of the chamber for what felt like hours, though time had already begun to lose its meaning. The witness waited without impatience. It had no need for urgency. Everything that ever resisted eventually surrendered. But Elias hesitated, not out of fear, out of understanding. I see what you do, Elias said quietly. You don't destroy, you archive. The cavern responded, not with words, but with sensation, a deep resonance, like stone remembering pressure. You preserve what the world would erase, Elias continued, but you take away choice. A flicker passed through the witness's form, a disturbance, not anger, confusion. Choice was a human concept. Memory was not. Elias felt his father near him now, not as a vision, but as a presence, layered into the air itself. Henry Crowe's thoughts brushed against his own. You're closer than I ever was, his father's voice seemed to say. That's why you can still turn back. Elias clenched his fists. You let the colony believe they were escaping, Elias said. You let them think they were surviving. But you froze them in time. You turned them into records. The witness shifted. The carvings on the cavern walls deepened, lines carving themselves anew, as if reality itself were being edited. For the first time, Elias sensed something like resistance. Above ground, Thomas Hale felt it immediately. The island shuddered, not violently, but profoundly, like a breath drawn too deep. Birds exploded from the treetops. The fog began to thin, unraveling in unnatural spirals. Hale stood at the edge of the sinkhole, heart pounding. Henry, he whispered. What did your son do? The witness showed Elias something it had never shown anyone before. Its origin. Long before ships crossed the Atlantic, before names and borders and flags, there were places where the world folded inward. Thin places. Not portals, but overlaps, where memory accumulated so densely that it began to observe itself. The witnesses were born from those places. They were not invaders. They were consequences. Human presence, especially human suffering, strengthened them. Loss fed them. Forgotten lives gave them shape. And when humans began arriving in waves, building, dying, abandoning, the witnesses grew. America was not haunted because of what happened there. It was haunted because of how much was left unfinished. "You don't need to take any more," Elias said, his voice steady now. "You already have enough." The witness recoiled slightly. Enough was not a concept it understood. Elias reached into his coat and removed the journal. He flipped to the final blank pages. "My father thought the only way to understand you was to stay," Elias said. He was wrong. Elias pressed the journal against the stone floor. "I will remember," he said. "I will tell your story." The cavern trembled. The witness surged forward, its form expanding, towering over Elias. The pressure was immense now, memories crashing into him. Wars, migrations, erased towns, unmarked graves. Elias screamed as they tore through him, threatening to dissolve his identity into the archive. But he did not let go. "I remember," he shouted, "and I choose to leave." The symbols on the walls cracked. A sound filled the cavern, a sound no human had ever heard here before. Something breaking. Henry Crowe felt himself unravel. For decades, or seconds, he had existed as a preserved moment, a living annotation in the witness's record. He had accepted it. He had even believed it was necessary. Then his son spoke. Memory surged, not as collection, but as release. Henry felt weight return to his body. Time rushed back in, chaotic and overwhelming. He fell to his knees on cold stone, gasping. He was alive. Hale saw two figures emerge from the sinkhole at dawn. He ran forward, disbelief freezing him in place. Elias stumbled into the light, exhausted, eyes hollow, but burning with purpose. Behind him, supported by Elias's arm, was Henry Crowe, older, thinner, but undeniably real. Hale fell to his knees. "My God," he breathed. Henry looked at the island, at the trees, at the sky. "They're weakened," Henry said hoarsely. "Not gone, but changed." Elias nodded. "They'll never be the same." The fog lifted completely for the first time in Hale's memory. The official story was carefully constructed. Henry Crowe had been found alive after suffering memory loss due to an accident in an undocumented cave system. Elias Crowe was hailed as a miracle survivor. The sinkhole was sealed, the site declared unsafe. Most people accepted it. They always did. But some things changed. Across the country, places long associated with unexplained disappearances grew quieter, not silent, but less hungry. The dreams stopped. The compulsions faded. The witnesses still existed, but they were no longer unchallenged. Years later, Elias sat in a small study, surrounded by maps and books and recordings. He spoke into a microphone, his voice calm and deliberate. "This is not a ghost story," he said. "This is a history of what we chose not to see." He paused, then continued. America's oldest mystery was never about where people went. It was about who was watching when they did. Somewhere beneath Roanoke Island, deep cracks spread through ancient stone. And for the first time in centuries, the watchers were forced to remember what it felt like to be remembered in return. Time did not heal Roanoke Island. It merely covered the wound with grass and brochures and carefully worded plaques. Elias learned that truth slowly, over years, not days. The island returned to normal for visitors. School buses, guided tours, souvenir shops. But underneath the surface, something had been permanently altered. The land felt aware now, as if it knew it had been seen. Henry Crowe never fully recovered. Doctors called it neurological trauma, prolonged dissociation, temporal confusion. Henry called it coming back wrong. He remembered centuries as clearly as childhood, remembered faces that never appeared in photographs, remembered voices that belonged to no language still spoken. "They didn't erase me," Henry told Elias one night, sitting on the porch of their rented house near the Outer Banks. "They layered me." Henry rarely slept. When he did, he spoke in fragments, names, coordinates, dates that did not align with any calendar. Thomas Hale retired 6 months after the incident, officially. Unofficially, he stayed on the island, living quietly in a house no tourist ever noticed. He and Elias spoke often, usually at night. "They're adapting," Hale said during one such call. "You disrupted a system older than the country. Systems don't die. They evolve." The first sign came from Massachusetts. A graduate student researching early Puritan settlements published a paper about a statistical anomaly in colonial burial records, dozens of names appearing in correspondence, but never in death registries, nor in census follow-ups. People who simply ended. Elias read the paper twice, then a third time. The symbols in the margins were wrong, subtly altered versions of the ones beneath Roanoke. The witnesses were learning to hide differently. Elias began to travel. He did not announce himself. He did not lecture or warn. He listened. He recorded. He followed patterns Henry could still see with terrifying clarity. Jamestown, Salem, Cahokia, St. Louis riverfront caves, the desert outside Santa Fe, where Spanish missionaries once vanished between outposts, the forests of upstate New York, where entire Iroquois villages had relocated without explanation in the late 1600s. Everywhere, Elias found thin places. Everywhere, he felt watched. In Virginia, he met a woman named Ruth Calder. She was a park archivist, sharp-eyed, skeptical, and exhausted in the way only someone guarding secrets could be. She showed Elias a private collection of ranger reports, people found wandering barefoot, unable to say how long they'd been gone, people who spoke of rooms under the earth filled with echoes. "You ever feel like history is incomplete?" Ruth asked him. "All the time," Elias replied. She smiled grimly. "Good. Then you won't call me crazy." Ruth became his ally. Then another joined them. Then another. They did not call themselves anything. They just compared notes. The witnesses did not respond immediately. They observed. Elias felt their attention like a weight in his chest whenever he entered certain places. Not anger, not hunger. Assessment. They were measuring him the way they once measured the colony. Henry Crowe died 3 years later. Peacefully, in his sleep, his final words were written, not spoken. They're afraid now. Elias buried his father near the coast, within sight of the water, but far from Roanoke. He did not trust the island with Henry's body. At the funeral, the fog rolled in briefly, then retreated. Elias took it as confirmation. The next escalation came from the Midwest. A small town in Illinois reported an impossible event, an abandoned settlement discovered beneath farmland during a drainage project. Not ancient, not native, American, wooden houses, tools, personal items, all preserved as if the people had simply stepped away. But no records of the town existed, not federally, not locally. Elias arrived 2 days before the site was sealed. He stood at the edge of the excavation pit and felt it immediately. The same pressure, the same layered silence. But different. The witnesses had not taken these people. They had abandoned the archive. That night, Elias dreamed of the cavern again. This time, the witness did not stand alone. There were fewer of them, and cracks ran through their forms like fault lines. They were losing cohesion. Memory without replenishment decayed. And for the first time, Elias felt something else beneath their presence: fear. The witnesses had always relied on one thing: human forgetting. Now, people were remembering, not consciously, not clearly, but enough to disrupt the balance. Elias recorded his findings obsessively: audio logs, handwritten notes, encrypted backups scattered across servers and safe deposit boxes. He learned to think in redundancies, the way archivists always should have. Ruth called him one night, her voice tight. "They're closing sites," she said. "Not just sealing, erasing, files disappearing, digital and physical." "Who?" Elias asked, though he already knew. "The government," she said, "or something inside it." The witnesses did not need to operate alone anymore. They never had. Elias realized the final truth too late. The witnesses were not the only keepers of memory. Power had always learned from them. What they did underground, institutions had replicated above ground. Archives curated by omission, histories shaped by silence. The witnesses were ancient, but they were no longer the most dangerous force preserving selective memory in America. Elias returned to Roanoke Island one last time. The sinkhole was gone, filled in, landscaped. A bench placed over it with a plaque describing natural erosion. Elias sat on the bench at dusk. "I know you're still here," he said quietly. The air thickened, not as before. Weaker, fragmented. "You don't have to keep doing this," Elias said. "Neither do we." The ground beneath the bench vibrated faintly. For the first time, Elias felt uncertainty echo back at him. Far below, the witnesses were changing, not collecting, listening, learning something they had never needed before: how to let go. The air on Roanoke Island smelled of salt and cedar that evening, but there was another undertone now, metallic, faint, like a warning. Elias leaned back on the bench, closing his eyes, letting the breeze play across his face. It was quiet, almost too quiet. He thought of every step he had taken since receiving his father's journal, of every lost colony, every forgotten town, every thin place he had tracked across America. He realized then that he had become more than a chronicler. He had become a participant, a variable in a system that had once been absolute. A low vibration shivered beneath his seat. He opened his eyes. The ground looked ordinary: grass, soil, sunlight fading into amber. But he could feel it, the faint presence of something observing, measuring, evaluating. "You're changing," he whispered to the empty air. "You've never had to adapt before." A shiver ran through the island, subtle, almost polite in its menace. Elias stood, brushing the sand from his coat, feeling the weight of memory in every nerve. He turned his gaze inland. The trees appeared to lean toward him, leaves rustling without wind. Shapes flitted in the corners of his vision. Not fully visible. Not yet. "You've been waiting for someone to remember you," Elias said. His voice was calm, though his hands trembled slightly. "And I have." The ground beneath the former sinkhole vibrated again, slightly stronger this time, and a faint outline of one of the witnesses appeared. Tall, elongated, and incomplete, like smoke caught in a draft. Elias didn't flinch. He had been unafraid before, but this was different. This was recognition. "You feed on forgetting," Elias continued, "but humans are beginning to resist. We're learning to remember. We can't be cataloged anymore." The form shifted, folding into itself, reacting to his words. For the first time, Elias felt the presence hesitate. "I am not alone," he said, thinking of Ruth, of Hale, of every scholar, every historian, every archivist, quietly tracing patterns across the country. And every person who remembers gives you less power, less certainty. A strange resonance echoed through the island, a vibration that felt almost like acknowledgement. The witness's presence didn't disappear, but it shrank, dimmed, fractured into segments. Elias sank to the ground. Exhaustion pressed into his bones, but there was triumph in it, subtle, like a dawn after endless night. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun had almost disappeared behind clouds. Somewhere in the distance, gulls cried, and waves whispered secrets against the shore. The air carried the scent of old brine and a quiet promise. The land would still remember, but it would no longer control memory entirely. Weeks later, Elias met with Ruth in a library tucked into the heart of Norfolk. Old tomes lined the walls, and digital databases hummed quietly, waiting to be discovered. She leaned over a table covered with journals and maps. "They've receded," she said, eyes bright. "Not gone, but restrained. Sites we thought were lost, anomalies that vanished. They're slowing down." Elias nodded. "Not because we defeated them," he said, "but because we remembered. We acknowledged them. And remembering is a kind of resistance." Ruth paused, glancing at him. "Do you think they'll return?" Elias shook his head slowly. "Yes, but they'll be different. We've changed the rules." The quiet that followed was not emptiness. It was awareness, a tenuous balance between what had always been and what could be. Months turned into years. Elias and Ruth traveled quietly, documenting thin places and anomalies across the country. Some remained shrouded in secrecy, never fully explained. Others revealed histories that had been buried in the public record. Each discovery strengthened the awareness that the witnesses were not invincible. They could be observed. They could be acknowledged. And in acknowledgement, they were altered. At night, Elias often returned to the journal. The pages were worn, and the ink had faded even further. But he continued to add his notes, observations, sketches of symbols, and new locations. The journal was no longer merely a record of his father's obsession. It was a map of a new understanding. Sometimes he could still feel them beneath the ground. The witnesses lingered, patient and curious, not threatening, not yet, but aware. He spoke aloud in the empty room, as if the words themselves could reinforce the truth. "We remember you, and that changes everything." For the first time, Elias truly believed it. At the edge of the Atlantic, on a quiet stretch of sand near Roanoke, Elias paused. He could see the horizon smeared with gold and violet. He imagined the colony, walking beneath the earth, preserved not as victims, but as witnesses themselves, part of a memory that now included him. He let the wind carry his words, the tide embrace them. "You are not forgotten, and neither are we." Somewhere beneath the surface, in the veins of the island, and in the fractured depths of America's oldest mysteries, something shifted. The witnesses pulsed, not in hunger, not in control, but in recognition. And for the first time in centuries, they waited, uncertain. Elias turned away from the shore. There was more to document, more to observe, more to remember. The country was vast, full of history both recorded and hidden, and he had inherited a mission his father had never completed, to bear witness. But this time, he was not alone. The mystery of Roanoke had changed, and so had the man who would remember it.